Here for a fireside chat with Sabrina, please welcome Jarl Mohn, the former CEO of National Public Radio, E Entertainment, and Liberty Digital.
Thank you, Cara. It's an honor to be here tonight with my longtime friend, Sabrina Kay. We're going to spend a few minutes with her and learn about her background and her education and her business, her being an entrepreneur and being a philanthropist here in Southern California. So Sabrina, congratulations on being an honoree tonight with the Asia Society. I know you grew up in South Korea. You moved to Los Angeles when you were in college. You said that when you came here, no one in the family spoke English. Let's start there. What was it like for you when you first moved here? And what were your first job? What was your first job or your first jobs here?
Y'all, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And, your friendship really means more than anything to me. And Kara, thank you for the introduction. And I'm just so honored to be part of Asia Society. So to answer your question, y'all, when animals migrate and leave their normal surroundings, they, I think, become very hypervigilant about finding food and shelter, and they often do find food and shelter. I was that hungry animal as a single mom in college with a young daughter. Fear is such a great motivator. I worked 3 jobs and didn't even sleep that much. So my first jobs were as a janitor at a Korean janitorial company, a waitress at a Japanese restaurant, and I don't know what it's called. I did other people's laundry called the fluff and fold at a Korean laundromat near my school. And, my dad graduated at the top of his class from Seoul National University Law School. And my mom graduated from Ewha University Law School in Korea. These are top two universities. And when we arrived in America, we were all janitors. It was a top for everyone. But looking back, we're so grateful for the opportunities that we had in this country where everyone is equal with no class system. We appreciate not being shamed for our hard work. All I wanted at that time was just to be a good role model for my daughter.
So you were a janitor, you were a waitress, you were doing fluff and fold at a laundromat, and then you start the Art Institute of Hollywood, a very successful fashion and art college in the country. How did you make the transition from one to the other, or three to that?
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting story. I studied computer science in college because I didn't speak any English. I was learning Fortran and COBOL. Then I read a newspaper article stating that computers were coming into the fashion industry. And I think that was a moment that I knew I wanted to be in the technology business, not be a computer programmer. And I was absolutely sure that the future of the fashion industry lied in the computer technology. So I made a cold call from that newspaper article and convinced that fashion computer company called Leptra to donate the software to me. And they did. I got a garage space in Koreatown and hired workers from the streets and started teaching computers to fashion designers and pattern makers. That was the humble beginning of my first business, Art Institute of Hollywood.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about the role you played in Koreatown and getting in the spotlight during the 1992 riots.
When I started my business, it was March of 1992. I was naive, 20-something who didn't know anything, didn't know how to use fundraise. So I used over 20 credit cards to finance the company. A month later, April 29th in 1992, the LA riot happened right in Koreatown, where I started my business. The entire city was burning down, and I remember this so clearly because I was in my office late at night doing the payroll, and I smelled the gunfire outside. It was just so scary. The American media was portraying the riot as a conflict between Korean Americans and African Americans. Many Korean college students disagreed, and they were having a rally against American media at UCLA. And at that time, I had a friend who was a TV producer for evening news, and he didn't have anyone to report the story, and he asked me to do it. I'd never been on TV before, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I wanted to help, and I went and did it. But that TV segment somehow was so well received by the entire Korean community that the Korea Times wrote a full page article the next day, appointing me as the most eloquent leader of the next generation. Who knew, right? And then I became famous overnight. The Korean TV station that I was doing the reporting on, KTAN, they gave me a regular spot on Tuesday evening during the real primetime hours. Then Radio Korea asked me to do a weekly radio show, and like several newspapers and magazines called to do like monthly columns. So in just a short few years, I became the Oprah Winfrey of Koreatown. And whatever I was talking about, people were really interested. And I worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, but really without spending a lot of money on advertisement. It was enough to fund the company, and I was able to expand to different markets. And the company grew really exponentially every year. 10 years later, I sold it to a publicly traded company that offered me more money than I could have spent for the rest of my life.
That's a good thing.
That was a good thing. Yes.
So you sell your first company, you're in your 30s, you've got a ton of money at this point, and you retire briefly. You went back to school. It seemed like you disappeared from the face of the earth for a while. Why did you go back to school? You didn't have to.
No, selling the first business was a very anticlimactic. A lot of, you know, people wanted to write about Regs the Rich's stories, and I was on the cover of Fortune and LA Times and all that stuff. But I was really confused and very insecure. I was depressed as a workhorse that did not have a job. I didn't have a purpose. And I think also another thing was I was really ashamed of not having graduated from college, but I owned, operated, and sold a college and made a lot of money. So I applied to USC, and I got very lucky. USC made an exception for me and accepted me into their MBA program without an undergrad degree. So I think at that moment, I was much more excited than when I sold my company, but also was really scared that I would fail. I hired like 5 tutors and didn't even go to one tailgate party. And I really wanted to graduate with honors and finally make my Asian parents proud.
Well, I absolutely must have at that point. Uh, Tell us a little bit about starting the bank, the premier business bank. When did that happen? How did that happen?
Yeah, I became pretty close friends with my finance professor during my MBA program, and I also had a really good friend who's a real estate mogul, and I respected his opinions and his thoughts really a lot. We were all talking about starting a community bank, and you know, my friend already had it started, so we end up being on the board of the California charter of the community bank, and that was kind of the beginning of Premier Business Bank. The funny story about this whole thing is that that was kind of a catalyst of continuing my education, and because of my professor.
That's a great way to extend and continue your education. After your MBA, you went to Wharton. You commuted from Los Angeles to Philadelphia for 3 years to finish your coursework at University of Pennsylvania to get your PhD. Was it the same thing that motivated you to go back to school for your doctorate? Was that the same basic thing?
I think it was a little different at that time because after I graduated from USC, I didn't have a lot of imposter syndrome anymore. But I just loved being a student. So I told my professor that I didn't want to graduate. I had such a great time. And he said, Sabrina, you passed. You have to graduate. Why don't you just go and get your PhD? I think he may be kidding, but that was really the reason why I went to get my doctorate program. And the program was called Work-Based Learning Leadership, and it was a joint doctorate program at the Wharton School and Graduate School of Education. And most of my classmates were chief learning officers of the Fortune 200 companies. That program opened my eyes and changed my life. I learned how to learn, and I was able to use technology, which I always loved since I was in college, and I was able to teach others to learn efficiently in the 21st century because we're now learning so differently than before because of the computers that's coming into our lives.
Well, it was around this time that you also started two other businesses, Fremont College and also the Dale Carnegie business. Tell us about those and how they came to be.
Yeah, I am just such a big fan of America. I love the national ethos of America, the core belief in freedom, ideology, generosity towards the world, and also the business transparency that this country really provides for everyone to succeed. I think that's one of the reasons why we're still number one economy in the world, but we have a third world education and healthcare system. Uh, I wanted to make a difference and give back to the community and the country that gave and my family so many opportunities. I remember telling my professors that I wanted to take what I was learning in the Wharton classroom and teach inner city students the skills to launch their careers. It's kind of like knocking off Chanel when I was in the fashion industry. And they all cheered for me and really encouraged me to do it. So after that first week, I came back to Los Angeles and bought a small private college as a laboratory for my doctorate dissertation. And when I went back and told that to my professors, they all said, okay, you got to be careful. This may be the most expensive doctorate in the world. But, I was able to do what I was here to do for the next 13 years. I designed the new technology-driven learning model and implemented it into Fremont College. And I also bought Dale Carnegie franchise and made the concept of how to make friends and influence others into an MBA program. And when you give opportunities like this, I think that's how Middle America starts. It's not just by giving money to people to live. It's more of how to teach them to learn. And a lot of our students were able to graduate and make a living for their lives and make their lives better.
We've talked a little bit about coming to the United States as an immigrant. We've talked about your education. We've talked about being an entrepreneur. Now let's shift a little bit to kind of the things you've been doing recently: philanthropy, mentoring, advising. I've seen the boards that you served on, something in the order of 30 corporate, civic, and not-for-profit boards. What have you learned? Tell us a little bit about your board experience.
The board experience is really enriching and growing experience. I really enjoy that. And I didn't even know what I was doing when I first started because I was a young CEO and I wanted to give back to the community. That's when I met my mentor, Ambassador Frank Baxter, who was the CEO of Jeffries. He asked me to serve on the board of After School All Stars, and that was a charity that Governor Schwarzenegger started. After governor became the governor and ambassador became the ambassador, I became the chairman of the board in 2004. Since then, I've served on a lot of boards as an investor, independent director, or appointed a commissioner. It's been really a fantastic experience.
You sold these businesses in 2020, right before the lockdown occurred. Incredible timing.
Yeah, it was very lucky.
And it appears that you have retired again. at a very young age. I'm one of the people that doesn't believe that you've actually retired, but you seem focused on these three areas that we
No.
talked. Philanthropy, mentoring other CEOs, and advising companies. How do you see that personally as being different than being a CEO?
Being an entrepreneur is like giving a birth to 10 children. And being a CEO is like raising all of them at the same time. It, it was just such an incredibly rewarding, but also very difficult journey for me. There were so many good times and equal amount of struggling times. With that many years of experience now in strategy, marketing, and talent management, I think I have enough battle scars all over my body to be a corporate board member and an advisor to other CEOs. It's so inspiring for me to be with these committed CEOs and a brilliant team of people to have an opportunity to take the company to the next level. It's like being a grandparent instead of being a parent. I'm not a grandparent yet, but when I hear you and other friends talk about being a grandparent, you're just so happy and so proud, and you give love so unconditionally, and your advice is just all from the best intentions and the years of experience that you've had. And that's exactly how I feel about the companies I serve as an independent board member.
Terrific. Because of all the experience you've had as an entrepreneur, as a business person, as a corporate advisor, and so forth, uh, many people would consider you an elder stateswoman, although you're still very young in the business world. So, given your unique track record as a minority, as a woman, as someone that has been a highly successful serial entrepreneur, you probably have a great perspective for corporate boards. We've talked about not-for-profits as well, but for corporate boards, how do you make the decision about the companies that you want to work with?
I'm somewhat industry agnostic because I consider myself a business person, not a computer programmer, fashion designer, banker, educator, or an investor. That all these titles are all of me, but the underlying competencies were technology, talent management, and operational excellence. So how do I choose the companies to work with is probably the two important factors. One is people. I would, I love being with a brilliant and committed team and just being part of that team who really care. And the second is a contribution. When I can make an impactful contribution and be helpful, um, that's when I really feel that I've done my job. Right now, I serve on one public company board and would like to be involved in more large technology companies or any other companies that I can make positive impact, especially in a way that our humanity now need to learn to coexist with machines. And if we don't do something, our next generation coming, the Gen Zs, will be the loneliest generation ever, with really several underlying human emotional issues. And we experienced a lot of that during this COVID lockdown. And fear and loneliness, those all can be superpowers for motivation, but it is such a cruel master. Now I have the wisdom to know that difference. I would rather be a kingmaker than being the king myself. And I'll continue making my contribution as an advisor and a board member. Y'all, I think I'm ready to be a grandparent in the business.
Well, that's a terrific metaphor. Thank you. The story I find fascinating. I know others here tonight will as well. We appreciate you sharing your story with us. And also want to thank you again, or congratulate you on being an honoree here at the Asia Society of Southern California. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. And I'm truly honored to be part of this group.
What an incredibly interesting and insightful chat to hear about Sabrina's story and how she got to where she was. It's incredible to see how many different categories she has been involved in and to see how her work and dedication have impacted so many people. Thank you and congratulations again to Sabrina Kay for receiving the Education Visionary Award.